Information fueled, opinion driven. This is the Dan Mandis Show. Super Talk 99.7.
It is Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Great to be back with you. And I hope you're doing well. I'm going to get right to the very important person line. I want to say hello to Chris Lewis, of course, one of the big stories going on. One of the two big stories we have going on right now is the fact that Ethan Couch, you know, the affluenza teen, and his mom, Tanya. Authorities in America celebrated because yesterday they found them in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, and now it turns out that they are fighting their extradition back to the United States of America. Chris Lewis, you are an attorney in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and appreciate you being here. And you've been monitoring this case for quite some time. So let me ask you a question. What is the legal basis that Ethan and his mom can actually fight this extradition? Do they have a leg to stand on here legally?
You know, probably not. I know they've filed something called a writ of amparo. We don't hear about that a whole lot in the States. We hear more of writ of habeas corpus, and this is very similar to it. So they do have some rights in Mexico. I think that eventually what's going to happen sooner rather than later is Ethan and his mom will end up back in the States and back in Texas and have to face the music.
And let's talk about how long this process could take. And I know that you said sooner than later. I've seen, and that's one of the reasons why I'm so grateful to have you on the phone, is because I keep seeing so many different versions of the same story. So tell me, based on your opinion anyway, how long could this process take? I've seen some experts say they could be in Mexico for 10 months. I've seen other people say, oh, they'll be here tomorrow. So what do you think?
Well, I think the latest thing that I've seen is that the stay of extradition, it's been stayed for about 3 days. Obviously, we're talking about this case in Nashville, a case that emanates from Fort Worth, Texas.
Yes.
It's received a lot of national attention. There's a lot of political pressure that's associated with this case and with getting them back to the United States. That you don't typically see in criminal cases, and you especially don't see in juvenile cases. So, I mean, everybody is guessing at this point in time. Most people aren't familiar with the writ of amparo or how it actually works or what Mexico will do in this situation. I see this being fueled by politics. I think that in my personal opinion, he's going to be on a plane back to the United States within a couple of weeks. I think it's going to even be shorter than that. And the one thing that we're not talking about is we're talking about how long it could possibly take. I think that his defense lawyers have a situation that has been building, and much to Ethan Couch's detriment. And I think that this only fuels the fire.
Now, once they do get back to town eventually, and Ethan and his mom, Tanya, do arrive back in Dallas-Fort Worth, I see that the sheriff and the authorities there in Dallas-Fort Worth, they're looking to get Ethan a 10-year sentence by doing some sort of transferring from is it juvenile court to adult court. I saw those were the big headlines yesterday. Is that a reality? Could Ethan Couch, because of a probation violation, could he get 10 years in prison?
No, not at this point in time. So at this point in time, he's still in the juvenile system. He's got to be transferred to the adult system right around his 19th birthday, and I believe that's in April of next year. So he's in the juvenile system. He was sentenced in the juvenile system. So just give you a little bit of background here. He was charged with 4 counts of intoxication manslaughter. In Texas, that's the maximum punishment range on each count is 20 years in prison. And that's what the prosecutors initially wanted. Mm-hmm. He was sentenced to probation. Because he was sentenced to probation, his maximum sentence on each case now becomes 10 years. They don't have the 20 years available to him anymore. Because of this probation violation, they might have actually, I know we've seen the beer pong incident, they might have actually had a tough time proving that was a probation violation, but certainly by not checking in, by running to Mexico, by trying to keep authorities from apprehending him, he has certainly at this point violated his probation. The most that he can get for this violation of probation that we're all hearing about is 120 days in the county jail. That's it. Now, to answer your question, can he get 10 years? The answer is yeah, but it would be later down the road. So once he's transferred to adult court, to one of the adult district courts in Tarrant County, he will be put on other conditions of probation, and those could be modified. They could be added to. He could have a leg monitor. He could have a leg monitor called a Scram device that detects if he consumes any alcohol whatsoever. They could make it very, very onerous on him. If after he is transferred to the adult system, he, in the next 8 years, because he's already done about 2 years of probation,
right,
in the next 8 years, if he violates those terms and conditions of probation, then he could be sentenced to up to 10 years in prison. Now, that's just for one count. A lot of people, I know you may have seen that that he could, they want him to do 40 years. If a judge finds that when he's in the adult system that he's violated his probation, then he could sentence him to 10 years on each count, but then the judge would have to make a decision whether to stack those punishments or to have them run concurrently.
Now, let's talk about this judge for a second. Of course, there was a lot of controversy, a lot of attention, as you talked about earlier, to this particular case. The judge that essentially allowed Ethan Couch to not go to jail and offered him probation and all those kinds of things. Is this judge, is this an elected position? Is this judge somebody who is fearing some voter backlash because of this decision? Certainly in Dallas, Texas, this has been a very big story, as it has been nationally. So is he facing, or she, facing some sort of a voter backlash? That's one. And two, when Ethan does make it back into the court system in Tarrant County there in Dallas, Texas, then is that going to be the same judge that he faced earlier?
Great questions. There's been something, a little bit of change that's occurred since Ethan was sentenced. The judge in the original case, she's no longer on the bench. She chose to not seek re-election. So, yes, this would typically be a situation where if he violated the terms and conditions of his probation, he would go back to the original court, and assuming that the judge that sentenced him was still on the bench, that's the judge that he would appear in front of. In this situation, he's going to appear in front of the judge who has taken over for the other judge. The other judge, Judge Boyd, she chose to not seek re-election, so he's going to have a brand new judge in there. And yes, absolutely, there is. This has received so much attention. This is an elected position.
Right.
And certainly the voters are keenly aware of what's going on, and all eyes are going to be on this judge and whether or not this judge gives Ethan Couch the maximum that can be given to him right now, which is the 120 days.
Very briefly, and I'm may be stepping out of bounds here and asking you this question, so you can feel free to not answer it, but I've got to ask this question. With Judge Boyd, the original judge that Ethan Couch was in front of, was there any, I know that the parents of Ethan Couch, they're very rich, and I don't know if they're powerful, but they're certainly rich. That was part of the whole discussion. Was there any behind-the-scenes wrangling with Judge Boyd and maybe, local folks there in the county? What was the justification that Judge Boyd had in giving such a lenient sentence to Ethan Couch?
That's a great question. It's impossible to know. I can tell you that the lawyers, Reagan Wynn was one of the lawyers for Ethan Couch. He still is. He's a very good, very well-respected and capable attorney there in Fort Worth. And obviously we've heard a lot about the wherewithal of the Couch family.
Yes.
They had fantastic lawyers. They had fantastic representation. He pled guilty. The judge was the one that set the punishment. I don't want to necessarily say there was something nefarious going on behind the scenes. I don't know that there was, but there was definitely something in the presentation that struck a chord with the judge. The judge has had a similar case where she absolutely hammered the defendant, who was a juvenile and who was sentenced to 20 years, and this was several years before, and that person's blood alcohol concentration was much lower, and that person killed one person as opposed to 4 people. So I really don't know what it is or what it was about that particular case, but there was certainly something that caused her to deviate from what she had done in the past.
So there's been a lot of course, attention paid on the parents, and especially, obviously, Tanya Couch, because she is the one that fled with her son to Mexico. What are we looking at as far as charges that Tanya could face, and what kind of a sentence could those charges bring?
You know, as a parent, I can certainly understand trying to help your kids out, and you know, her son, I'm sure she felt like he was in a very precarious position, but she made things worse. And there's as much outrage about what Tanya Couch has done as Ethan Couch, because she's an adult. She should know better, and by all accounts, it looks like she hindered the apprehension of her son. That's what she could be facing. The charge here in Texas is anybody that does anything essentially to hinder the capture or the apprehension of somebody. It's in some instances it's a misdemeanor. In this instance, since he was responsible for multiple felonies, then her responsibility, if she's determined to be culpable for this, would be a third-degree felony, which is anywhere from 2 to 10 years in prison.
You said by all accounts she hindered the apprehension. What I have not seen, we know, obviously she took her son to Mexico. Do we know any sort of a timeline as to what happened? We know that, and I covered here on the show, we know about the YouTube video of Ethan Couch playing beer pong. We mentioned, or at least I mentioned, that there was some sort of a going away party, and I think you're talking about the outrage that folks have against Tanya and, of course, Ethan as well. And I think part of this is just the fact that they are flaunting the fact that they don't feel like the law should apply to them. So, one, do you know anything about this sort of going away party that Ethan and Tanya threw? And two, do we know how exactly what it is that she did as they fled to Mexico? What was that process like? Well,
I probably know about as much as you know about that, but I can tell you this. What it appears to me that the mindset is, with the whole affluenza defense, it was that defense that was, to me, that seemed like that was them saying, hey, the law should not apply to us. And I think what common people hear is, okay, you've got a lot of money, so the law shouldn't apply to you like it does everybody else. And I think that's why everyone's so outraged about it. I think them taking off to Mexico was the realization that the law that applies to everyone else is about to apply to us. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, they would have never run. If they felt like there was something they could do because of their wealth or their power or their position, if there was anything that they could do to prevent the punishment, then they would have stayed, and they would have fought, and they would have used that influence. They didn't. They took off, and not only did they take off, but they weren't staying. They were staying in a resort town, but it didn't look like they had plush accommodations.
Right.
He had changed his appearance. I've seen reports where she might have altered her appearance a little bit, but I think that there was a domino effect. Yeah. That once the Twitter video came out that showed him engaging in beer pong, they didn't know what was going to happen at that point. And so rather than sit around and see what was going to happen, they decided to take matters into their own hands and decided to flee the country.
You know what's interesting what's interesting about this, too, and you may or may not have an opinion on this, but I'm just going to ask the question, why Puerto Vallarta, Mexico? I mean, these folks had so much money. I would think that they would have had enough money. If they truly wanted to just disappear, they could have not only obviously altered their appearance, but they could have also had the amount of money that they do. They could have bought new identities and gone to some other place not nearly as close to Texas as Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. Do we have any idea why they chose to make just that, relatively speaking, short trip to Puerto Vallarta when they could have gone to literally anywhere in the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of reasons. Number one, these aren't savvy criminals. These aren't people that have engaged in some sort of scheme where now that they can go live and set up another life in a different part of the world. They certainly have the money to probably be able to do something like that, but that's not the type of criminals that these people are. Yeah. And doing criminal defense law as long as I have, one of the things that we see is a lot of times people get caught because they have a very poor exit strategy. And I think this was a thing where they saw the writing on the wall, and that was they believe my son has violated terms of probation. We just need to get out of here. Why Mexico? Wouldn't surprise me if they're familiar with Mexico, if they visited Puerto Vallarta. And I don't think it was a long-term plan. I don't think it was, how are we going to detect or how are we going to avoid authorities forever? How are we going to not answer the music forever? I think this was a knee-jerk reaction. I don't want my son to be arrested. I don't want to be arrested. Let's get out of town.
Chris Lewis, attorney at law in Dallas-Fort Worth, very much appreciate your analysis on the Ethan Couch saga, and you have a great day. It is 12:22 on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.